Welcome to our first keynote speaker session with Jocko Willink. Before we get started, I wanted to go over a few housekeeping items. As this session begins, all of our cameras and audio will be turned off. The chat function has also been disabled for this presentation. I encourage you to take advantage of the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen to submit your questions to Jocko. Jocko's presentation is approximately 45 minutes, and following his presentation, Jocko will spend 30 minutes answering your personal questions that you have submitted. We are so fortunate to have such a passionate speaker to kick us off today. Jocko spent 20 years in the military with the Navy SEAL teams, starting as an enlisted SEAL and rising the ranks to become officer. As commander of SEAL Team 3's Task Unit Bruiser during the Battle of Ramadi, he orchestrated SEAL operations that helped the Ready First Brigade of the U.S. Army's 1st Armored Division bring stability to the violent, war-torn city. Upon retiring from the Navy, Jocko co-founded Echelon Front, a premier leadership consulting company. He is a co-author of 3 New York Times best-selling books, including Extreme Ownership: How the U.S. Navy SEALs Lead and Win, which ranked #1 on the list. He also has one of the top business podcasts on the market, Jocko Podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, Jocko Willink.
Well, to start with, I just wanted to quickly say thank you to Milner for bringing me here and for the opportunity to speak to you all. And of course, thanks to you all for joining. Now, I spent my adult life in the military, in the SEAL teams to be more specific. And the last deployment that I did was in the Battle of Ramadi. And it was a very tough fight, a very violent fight, and there was a heavy price paid. But we were able to achieve victory on that battlefield. And when I came home from that deployment, I took over the training for the West Coast SEAL teams. Now, the training that I took over, it's not the training that you see on TV where you see the guys carrying the boats on their head and you see guys carrying telephone poles around. That's not the training that I took over. That's the basic training. I took over the tactical training, the advanced training for the SEAL teams on the West Coast, where SEALs learn to shoot, move, and communicate, where they learn to maneuver elements on the battlefield, and most important, where they learn about leadership. And the very first training event that I went on with a SEAL platoon was a complete disaster. They are out on a training mission. We used paintball. Everyone got shot with paintball. There was confusion. There was chaos. No one knew what to do. They completely failed the mission. And as I watched that platoon fall apart during this training mission, I realized that the reason they were falling apart is because the leaders did not know how to lead. And then, of course, I realized that I'm the one that's supposed to be teaching them how to lead. And so when I went back to my barracks room that night, I knew what I had to do was take all the lessons that I had learned throughout my career, lessons that I had solidified during the Battle of Ramadi, and I needed to distill those lessons down into something that these young SEAL leaders could easily understand and then implement into their SEAL platoons. So I ended up writing down what I now call the 4 laws of combat leadership: cover and move, simple, prioritize and execute, and decentralized command. And I want to talk you through those, what they mean. So the first one is cover and move. And cover and move is actually a gunfighting tactic. That's what it is. It's a gunfighting tactic. So if you get into a machine gun fight, the way that you win is by using cover and move. And let me explain what it looks like. So let's say that myself and my teammate, we wanted to take down a building across the street and take out the bad guys that were in that building. Well, here's what we would do. First, I would start shooting at those bad guys. Now, while I'm shooting at those bad guys, what are the bad guys doing? I'll tell you what they're doing. They're hiding. They're getting their heads down. They don't want to get shot, so they're hiding. And so while I'm shooting, it allows my teammate to move to a better position. Once my teammate's in a better position, he starts shooting at the bad guys. While he's shooting at the bad guys, their heads are down, they're hiding. That gives me a chance to move. I move into a better position. Once I'm in a better position, I start shooting again. And that's what we do. My teammate and I, we work together as a team to get close enough to the bad guys, to take out the bad guys and take control of that building that we wanted. Now, pretty straightforward. Let me ask you this. What happens if my teammate is up and moving while I'm supposed to be shooting, and all of a sudden I decide, I'm kind of thirsty right now. I'm going to put down my weapon and I'm going to stop shooting and I'm going to get a drink of water out of my canteen. Well, then what do the bad guys do? Well, then the bad guys who had been hiding, now they look up because there's no one shooting at them and they see my teammate moving. And then you know what they do? Well, they shoot my teammate. Why do they do that? Because they're bad guys. And I might be sitting here thinking, oh, that's really horrible. That's too bad for my teammate. But guess what? It's not just bad for my teammate. It's bad for me as well. It's bad for me as well because now that my teammate's gone, I've lost my cover. And now the bad guys are going to cover and move on me, and they're going to take me out next. So when one part of the team fails, it's not just that part of the team that fails. It is the whole team that fails. So we have to make sure we are supporting each other. And in order to support each other, what we need to do inside any team, inside any organization, we need to build relationships. I need to build relationships, not just within my own team, but with other teams that are relying on me for support and that rely on me for support. That way we can give each other what we need. We know what we need, but because we have those relationships. So we need to build relationships so that we can cover and move for each other as a team. That's the first law of combat leadership. The second law of combat leadership is simple. You have to keep things simple. And in my job training these young SEALs, I would have these young SEAL officers coming out of college and going through the basic SEAL training, and then they would show up to my training. And when they would get to my training, I would give them some kind of a training mission, I'd give them a mission tasking, and I'd say, come up with a plan on how you want to do this mission. And they would disappear for 4 or 5 hours, and they'd come back to me, and they'd walk into the room, and they'd present their plan to me. And as they would show me their plan, well, they'd have a look on their face as if it was the most brilliant plan ever. But as soon as I would look at the plan, I would see that the plan was this convoluted, complex thing that no one could understand. And I'd say, listen, here's what's going on. This is not going to work. And of course, then they'd get a dejected face because they thought their plan was brilliant. And I'd say, listen, the best plan and the most brilliant plan is the plan that is so simple and so clear that every single person on the team actually understands the plan. That's what you want to do. So then they'd come up with a more simple plan and they'd go out on this training exercise. They'd come back and they'd say to me, I came up with a simple plan, but my team just didn't do what I told them to do. And I'd say, well, gee, what do you think is wrong with your team? And they'd say, I don't know. And I'd say, well, do you think that they're stupid? And they'd say, no, they're not stupid. I'd say, do you think that they didn't hear you? And they'd say, no. And I'd say, do you think that they don't care? And they'd say, no, I don't think that's it either. And I'd say, so gee, what do you think could possibly be wrong with your team? And they'd say, I don't know. And then I'd say, that's because it's not your team. It's you. If your team isn't doing what it is you want them to do, the very first person you should check with is yourself to make sure that you are giving direction in a simple, clear, concise manner that everyone on the team understands. Because if the team doesn't understand the plan or they don't understand how you communicate that plan to them, there is no possible way that they can execute. So you have to keep things simple. That is the second law of combat leadership. And now we get to the third law of combat leadership, which is prioritize and execute. Prioritize and execute. So when I was running that advanced SEAL training, I went through great lengths to make the training as realistic as possible. We used these high-speed paintball guns that looked like our real guns, but they shot paintballs. I hired Hollywood set designers to come down and make our training sites look like they were villages or cities overseas. I hired special effects people and pyrotechnicians, and I hired actors and actresses to come. And so this is what it would look like for a SEAL platoon. A SEAL platoon would enter a building to clear that building, and boom, there'd be a big explosion. And people would get hit in the face with pieces of foam. And then as the room is all filled with smoke from that explosion, all of a sudden as the smoke started to clear, they would hear screaming, and they would look down on the ground, and on the ground would be a guy writhing in pain and covered in fake blood. And it would just be an actor, and it would just be fake blood, but believe me, the adrenaline would get going. And then as that's happening, another door would open up, and out would walk 3 middle-aged women, and they'd be screaming at the top of their lungs in a different language. And then as that's happening, I'd make a bunch of explosions go off. And then I would start shooting everyone with paintball. So not only would I try and make the training appear real, but I would try and make it feel real. And the way I tried to do that was by giving these young SEALs problems. Give them problems to deal with. Because on the battlefield, just like in business and just like in life, we're going to have problems. And because of Murphy's Law, all those problems are going to hit us at the same time. And so that's what I would do. I would give them multiple problems. I would shoot them with paintball. I would give them a wounded guy to deal with. I'd give them civilians to deal with. I would split their forces up so they had people in a bunch of different locations. And I would watch these young SEAL leaders to see how they would handle all those problems. And what I would see them do is they would run to the wounded guy and try and help the wounded guy out. And then they'd get up and try and figure out what to do with these civilian women. And then they'd try and figure out where they're getting shot at from. And then they'd try and locate all the troops. And then they'd go back to the wounded guy. And then they'd go back to the civilian women. And they'd go back to try and figure out where they're getting shot at from. And then they go back to trying to locate all their troops. And they would try and solve all of their problems at the same time. And when they would try and solve all their problems at the same time, they wouldn't solve any of them. So I would pull them aside and I'd say, listen, when you have all these problems happening, what you need to do is you need to prioritize and execute. The third law of combat leadership, you need to prioritize and execute. You need to figure out what the biggest problem is. Where is the biggest priority? And then focus your resources on that problem until you get that biggest problem solved, or you at least get it moving in the right direction. Then you can move on to the next biggest problem. Once you got the next biggest problem solved, you can move on to the next biggest problem, and so on down the line until you've got all of your problems taken care of, got all your problems handled. Prioritize and execute. And they'd look at me and say, okay, got it, boss. And then I'd send them out on another training operation. And on that next training operation, I would start to throw all these problems at them again. They'd be walking down the street. All of a sudden, they'd start getting shot at with paintballs. Civilian would walk out. One of their guys would get hit and fall down. Everyone would be in different locations. And I would pay attention to what they would make the number one priority. And 9 times out of 10, what they would focus on first as their number one priority would be their wounded guy. They'd see their guy get shot. He'd fall down. He'd start yelling. And they would run over to help him. And when they would run over to help him, guess what would happen to that leader? That leader would get shot as well, because they didn't solve the actual biggest problem, which was the people with the paintball guns trying to shoot you. And I tried to figure out why SEALs would continually make this mistake over and over again. They'd go to that wounded guy. They'd go to that wounded guy. And I eventually figured out what was causing the problem. The problem was there's so much chaos and mayhem going on that they would get wrapped up in that chaos and mayhem. They would get totally focused on all these micro problems. And they would also get emotional. So what I had to teach these young SEALs to do was I had to teach them to detach from the chaos, detach from the mayhem, and most important, detach from their own emotions so that they could logically assess what their biggest problem was and focus their resources on that problem and prioritize and execute. So that is the third law of combat leadership: detach and then prioritize and execute. And that leads us to the fourth law of combat leadership, which is decentralized command. Now, decentralized command this is something that I used to hear a lot when I was in the military. It's something that I hear a lot now that I work with civilian companies. And yet very seldom do I see decentralized command executed well. And it's actually not that complicated. What decentralized command means is simply everybody leads. Everybody leads. And that's what we want. As a leader, we want everyone on our team to also lead. And I used to tell this to those young SEAL leaders. I would say, hey, you know that training problem that I sent you on last night that was total chaos and mayhem? And they'd say, yeah. And I'd say, it's going to be even worse tonight. There's going to be even more problems. And you're not going to be able to handle it all yourself. What you need to use is decentralized command. You need to let your subordinate leaders lead. Let your subordinate leaders lead. And they'd look at me and say, okay, got it, boss. And then I'd send them out on a training operation. And I would start to throw all that chaos and mayhem at them. And I would watch. And I would watch those subordinate leaders. And sometimes I would see those subordinate leaders, they'd start to step up and they'd start to lead. And for a moment, I would have hope in my heart that things were going to go well. But then I'd see those subordinate leaders start to lead in opposite directions. Or they would bump into each other, or they'd run each other over. Sometimes they would even shoot each other with paintball. And it would be a total disaster, and they would fail the mission. And I would bring them back to the base, and I'd bring them into the debriefing room, and I'd bring the platoon leader up to the front of the room, and I'd say, okay, Lieutenant, that was absolutely horrible. What happened? And the platoon leader would say, well, I tried using that decentralized command stuff that you talked about, but it just doesn't work. And then, of course, I'd have to detach a little bit and get control of my emotions because I knew, and I would tell them that decentralized command actually works great. It's just that you are terrible at it. And then, of course, I'd realize that I'm the one that's supposed to be teaching decentralized command, so I'm the one that's terrible. And I'd say, listen, here's what's going on. In order for decentralized command to work, you still have to lead. And the way that you lead with decentralized command is by making sure that everyone on the team knows what the mission is, knows what the goal is, knows what the end state is, knows the parameters that they're allowed to work within. And the most important thing that they need to understand is why they're doing what they're doing. That's the most important thing they need to understand is why they're doing what they're doing. So let me explain what that looks like. So I'm a platoon commander and I've got one of my guys, Bill. And I say, okay, Bill, here's what's going on. We're going to go on this mission tonight. And on this mission, we're going to assault this building. And once we get this building secure, I want you to take your team up to the rooftop to set security. And Bill says, cool, got it. Now, we go on the mission. We assault this building. We get the building secure. And Bill takes his team up to the rooftop to set security. Now, being on the rooftop is a great place to be because you're in an elevated position. And when we looked at the imagery of this building before we assaulted it, it looked like there was a wall around the roof, maybe a 4-foot wall that you could hide behind. So you could be in this elevated position, but the enemy couldn't see you because there's a wall there. So that's why we sent Bill up there. Well, Bill gets up there and he realizes that this wall that looked like it was 4 feet tall is actually 4 inches tall. And that means the enemy can see Bill and his team. And that means the enemy can shoot Bill and his team. So this is a very bad situation for Bill. And it's a bad situation for Bill's team. And Bill's team is kind of looking at Bill thinking, hey, this doesn't make much sense. And finally, someone on Bill's team says, hey, Bill, this is stupid. Why are we even up here? And Bill, not wanting to be the one that's stupid, says, well, we're up here because Jocko told us to be up here. And so now what we have is a team where the team is exposed to the enemy can see the enemy can shoot at the team, and the team thinks that their whole chain of command is stupid. So this is a horrible situation. How do we fix it? Well, what we do is we rewind. Let me go back to the planning, And I'm talking to Bill and I say, okay, Bill, here's what's going on. We're going to go on this mission tonight. We're going to assault this building. Once we get the building secure, I want you to take your team up to the rooftop to set security. And Bill says, cool, got it. And then I say, the reason why I want you to do that is I want you to make sure that no enemy approaches on this road up here to the north. And Bill says, cool, got it. And now the same thing happens. We go on the mission, we assault the building, we get the building secure. Bill takes his team up to the rooftop to set security. When he gets up there, he's expecting to see a 4-foot wall. Instead, he sees a 4-inch wall. He realizes that his team is exposed. He takes a minute to assess the situation. Once he assesses the situation, he says, hey, everyone, hey, team, come with me. He takes his team down the stairs, down to the 3rd floor, brings them into a north-facing room, opens up the windows, puts his machine gunners in place, and then he calls me up on the radio and says, hey, Jocko, it's Bill. There was no wall around the roof. My team was exposed. We're down in the 3rd floor. We're in a north-facing room, and I've got that road covered. And you know what I say? I say, thank you. I say, thank you. Because Bill solved the problem. And the reason that Bill was able to solve the problem is because Bill knew why he was doing what he was doing. So this is absolutely critical. Now, what if Bill goes into the field without knowing why he's doing what he's doing? Whose fault is that? Well, obviously it's my fault. I'm the leader. But it's not just my fault because I didn't explain to him why he's doing what he's doing. It's my fault because I haven't created a culture where if someone on my team doesn't know why they're doing what they're doing, they raise their hand and say, hey, boss, why are we doing this? Now, there's some bosses that don't like that. There's some bosses that when someone says, hey, boss, why are we doing this? You know what their answer is? Their answer is, shut up and do what I told you to do, which is not good leadership. When someone on my team asks me why they're doing what they're doing, I am overjoyed because now I can make sure that I explain to them why they're doing what they're doing, and that way they can go out into the field, they can make decisions, they can make things happen, and they can lead. And this is absolutely critical for any organization to operate with decentralized command, which is infinitely superior to centralized micromanagement where one person is making every single decision. We need to avoid that by employing that 4th law of combat leadership, which is decentralized command. So those are the 4 laws of combat leadership, and they're pretty straightforward. Now I want to talk to you about something that's it's a little bit sometimes harder to wrap your mind around. It's something that we call the dichotomy of leadership. And what the dichotomy of leadership is opposing forces that are pulling you as a leader in opposite directions. And both of the directions that you're getting pulled in are correct. So which way do you go? Well, let me give you an example. I just talked about decentralized command. Let your subordinate leaders lead. Well, the first book that I wrote about leadership was called Extreme Ownership. I want you to own everything. So which one is it? You want me to let my subordinate leaders lead, or do you want me to own everything? And the answer, and it's the same answer for every one of these dichotomies of leadership. The answer is, I want to be balanced. I want to be balanced. And there's an infinite number of these dichotomies where you're getting pulled in 2 different directions. Here's a simple example. Communication. Communication. As a leader, we have to communicate with the team. But is it possible to communicate too much? Well, yes, it is. And if you've ever worked for a boss that sent you 47 emails before 5 o'clock in the morning and you can't even read through them all, and you don't know which one is important and which one's not, and you don't have time to do anything else besides read emails, you know that there's a possibility of communicating too much. Is it possible to communicate too little as a leader? Well, yes, it is. And now the team doesn't know where we are. We don't know what direction we're going into. So where do we want to be? We don't want to communicate too much. We don't want to communicate too little. What do? We want to be balanced. We want to be balanced. I talked about controlling your emotions, and you absolutely have to keep control of your emotions. But I'm not talking about having no emotions. So if we have too many emotions and we let our emotions drive our decisions, we're not going to make good decisions. But that doesn't mean we can't have any emotions at all. We have to account for emotions because we're human beings and we're working with other human beings. So where do we want to be? We want to be balanced. Another clear example is planning. I work with some companies and they plan to plan, and then they start their planning process and they plan their planning process and they plan and they plan and they plan and they never execute. Or by the time they execute, the market has changed. They plan too much. And I also work with some companies that plan too little. They plan too little and they don't even come up with solutions for a basic contingency. They think they can just figure it out when it happens. And they're not ready. So we don't want to plan too little, but we don't want to plan too much. Where do we want to be? We want to be balanced. Another example is being aggressive. And I used to tell these young SEALs, you've got to be aggressive. There'd be a problem in a building. There'd be paintball flying everywhere from bad guys. And they'd kind of look at that building and then they'd back away from it. And I'd go behind him and I'd push him towards that building. And I'd say, the problem that's going on in that building, it's not going to go away. You got to go and solve it. You got to be aggressive. That's got to be your default mode, is to get aggressive and solve problems. Now, sometimes I would get that SEAL leader acting so aggressive that he's doing things that didn't make any sense or that were careless or that were too risky. So we don't want to be too aggressive, but that doesn't mean we can be passive and just allow things to happen. Where do we want to be? We want to be balanced. And that ties into another dichotomy, which is taking care of your people. And we have to take care of our people, but we can't coddle them necessarily. You still have to take care of your people, but you have to push them. You have to address things that need to be addressed. So where do you want to be? You want to be balanced. And the last thing that I'll talk about of these dichotomies is my personal favorite of the dichotomies, and that is discipline and freedom. Discipline and freedom. So on the one side, we've got discipline, which is a rigid, structured way of doing things. On the other side, we've got freedom, which is we do whatever we want. And of course, what does everybody want out of discipline or freedom? Of course, everybody wants freedom. That's what everybody wants. I mean, on an individual level, we all want financial freedom. We all want financial freedom. But what's so interesting about this dichotomy is if you want that financial freedom, you have to go through discipline to get there. You have to have the discipline to work hard. You have to have the discipline to save your money. You have to have the discipline to invest your money. You have to have the discipline not to buy stupid things that you don't even need. And if you can have that kind of financial discipline, you'll end up with financial freedom. Another individual example is time, right? Everybody wants more free time. So how do we get more free time? To get more free time, we need to have more disciplined time management. We need to have the discipline to create a schedule, to stick to our schedule, the discipline to wake up earlier in the morning, the discipline not to waste our time with things that provide us with no benefit. And if we can have more disciplined time management, we will have more free time. So it helps us as individuals. Discipline will give us freedom, but it helps us with our teams as well. And if you saw my SEAL platoon, you'd see that we had a disciplined, structured, standard operating procedure for just about everything that we did. For the way that we lined up our vehicles, for the way we loaded our vehicles, for the way we offloaded our vehicles, to the way we approached a building, for the way we entered that building, just about everything that we did, we had a disciplined standard operating procedure for. And you might think that this would constrain us out on the battlefield, but the opposite was actually true. Because if there was a building that we hadn't planned to take down, I could just say, hey, Bill, go take down that building over there. And Bill would say, cool, got it. And he didn't need to tell me who he was going to take with him or what weapons they were going to use or what they were going to do if they captured any bad guys. He didn't need to tell me any of that because we already knew. And his team already knew as well. So because we had disciplined standard operating procedures, it gave us freedom out on the battlefield. Now, is it possible for there to be too much discipline inside of an organization? Yes, it is possible. And I work with some companies and they've got so many processes and so many standard operating procedures that people can't move anymore. And what's worse than that, when they can't move, they stop thinking. So what we have to do is we have to have enough discipline so that people actually know what it is that they're trying to do and they have the structure to do it. But still, we have to balance that with enough freedom that they can make adjustments if they have to. Now, I'll say one more thing about discipline. One more thing about discipline as a team and as an individual. People talk a lot about being motivated and can you be motivated? How do you get motivated? And to me, I don't count on motivation. Why don't I count on motivation? Because motivation is just an emotion. It's like being happy or being sad or being angry or being frustrated. It's just an emotion that can come and go at any time. And I can't rely on that. What I can rely on is discipline. Discipline is what gives you the persistence as a team, as an individual, to keep going, to get back up and go again. Discipline means doing what you're supposed to do. Regardless of how you feel, you know what you're supposed to do. You need to impose the discipline that you actually go and do it. Now, discipline is a characteristic that we have, and a lot of times people ask me about what the most important characteristic for a person or for a leader to have. And for me, that's a pretty easy question for me to answer. For me, the most important characteristic that a person can have, that a leader can have, is humility. You've got to be humble. And the reason that I know this, the reason I can answer this confidently, is when I was running that advanced SEAL training, when we would have to fire a SEAL leader, when we would have to remove a SEAL leader from a leadership position, we would be firing that SEAL leader not because he didn't know how to shoot his gun, not because he wasn't in good physical condition, not because he didn't know how to read a map. We would fire those SEAL leaders because they lacked humility, because they couldn't put their ego in check. Because think about what it does to your mind when you can't keep your ego in check. When you can't keep your ego in check, you don't listen to anybody else. Why would you listen to anybody else? You already think you know everything. You're not going to listen to your subordinates because what could they know? You're not going to listen to your peers because you think you do it better. You're not even going to listen to your boss anymore because you think, oh, my boss doesn't know what it's like down here in the field. So you don't listen to anybody else. When you don't listen to anybody else, you don't learn anything. You don't adopt any new technology or any new methodologies, so you're not improving. When you lack humility, you don't respect your competitors. You don't respect the enemy. And when you don't respect your competitors, guess what? You think you can slack off. You think you don't need to plan. You don't need to prepare. You think you can cut corners. And when you cut corners and you don't prepare and you don't plan, guess what? That's when you get beat. That's when you get caught. And the worst is, you can't even, when your ego's out of control, when you're not humble, you can't even look in the mirror and do a good, honest assessment of yourself to see where you can improve. And if you're not improving while everyone else is, guess what? You are going to get crushed. So you have to stay humble. And this brings me to the last thing that I want to talk about, which is, well, it's the title of the first book that I wrote about leadership. This is extreme ownership. This is the attitude. This is the mindset. The mindset that I'm not going to blame anybody else. I'm not going to blame anything else. I'm going to take ownership when something is wrong, and I am going to fix it. Now, when I work with military leaders and military teams and civilian leaders and civilian teams, the difference between the winning teams and the losing teams and the winning leaders and the losing leaders was this attitude. And this was so easy for me to see when I was running that advanced SEAL training. Because when I was running that advanced SEAL training, Well, sometimes I was putting leaders through that training that were good SEAL leaders. And sometimes I was putting leaders through that training that were bad SEAL leaders. And the difference between the good SEAL leader and the bad SEAL leader, the biggest difference by far was this attitude. And I'll explain to you what it would look like. So if I had a bad SEAL leader coming through my training, a bad SEAL leader, I would take that bad SEAL leader and I'd take his platoon and I would send them out on a training operation. And of course, the training operations, like I said, they were very difficult. And things wouldn't go well, and everyone would get shot with paintball, and there would be chaos and confusion, and they'd fall apart. And I would bring that SEAL platoon back to base, and I would bring them into the debriefing room, and I'd bring that bad SEAL leader to the front of the room, and I'd say, okay, Lieutenant, that was horrible. What happened? And that bad SEAL leader, the bad SEAL leader would stand up, and he'd say, I'll tell you what happened. First of all, the assault team leader, you didn't bring enough people on that mission. You didn't do a good target study. You didn't see how big that target was, so you didn't bring enough people, and it took you forever to clear through that target. You better get a grip on reality for the next mission. And mobility commander, you in charge of the Humvees, in charge of picking us up, you didn't know where to come pick us up. That's really the only piece of information that you needed, and you didn't have it. That's pathetic. And then sniper team leader, you never told me where you were. You never reported your position, and that caused all kinds of confusion out there. That's ridiculous. So if we're going to do any better, you better figure out how to do your job. You better get a grip on reality, and you better square yourself away. And of course, I'd be sitting there listening to this debrief, and well, you can see there's something very peculiar about this debrief. What's peculiar about this debrief is that none of it was my fault. None of it was my fault. No, it was his fault. It was his fault. It was his fault. It was your fault. It was your fault. It was your fault. It was you. And what happens when that leader points his finger and says, it was you, it was you, it was you? You know what the reaction is? Everybody gets defensive. And when they get defensive, you know what they do? They point their finger at someone else. And then that person points their finger at someone else because they get defensive. And what you end up with is a team where everyone on the team is pointing their fingers at each other. No one is taking ownership of the problems, and therefore the problems, they don't get solved. And this team is never going to improve, and they certainly are not going to become exceptional. Now, you compare that with a good SEAL leader, and I'd have a good SEAL leader coming through my training program, and I'd send him and his platoon out on a training mission. And the training mission would be hard, and they would do just as bad, maybe even worse. Everyone gets shot with paintball. There's chaos and confusion. They don't complete the mission. I bring them back to base. I bring them into the debriefing room. I bring that good SEAL leader to the front of the room, and I say, okay, Lieutenant, that was horrible. What went wrong? And the good SEAL leader stands up and says, okay, let me tell you what I saw from my perspective. First of all, assault team leader, I didn't give you the people that you needed for that mission. I should have sat down with you. I should have made sure you knew how big that target was, and I should have made sure that I gave you more people for your assault team. Next time, I'll get with you and make sure you have the people that you need. Now, mobility commander in charge of the Humvees, in charge of picking us up, somehow you came to my brief that I'm responsible for, and I failed as a leader to convey to you the one piece of information that you needed, and that's where to pick us up. Next time, after the brief, I'm going to get with you for 3 minutes, and I'm just going to confirm on a map that you know exactly where to pick us up. And then, sniper team leader, I lost track of where you were. And probably my most important job as a battlefield leader is to know where all my troops were. I did not know where you were. Next time, I'm going to set some checkpoints along the way so that I know exactly where you are throughout the entire mission. So those are some things that I'm going to do different so that we can do a better job next time. Now, you can see this is a completely different debrief. And you might think now that the team points their finger back at me and they say, you're damn right, this is all your fault. But that actually doesn't happen. That actually doesn't happen. What happens is the assault team leader says, boss, I'm in charge of the target. I am supposed to do a good target study. I actually rounded down the number of people I thought I was going to need. I won't make that mistake again. You don't have to babysit me. And then the mobility commander says, hey, boss, there's only one piece of information that I needed, and I didn't have it. Not only did I not have it, no one on my team had it. That is not your fault. Next time, I will make sure and confirm 100% I know exactly where to pick you up, and so will everyone else on my team. And then the sniper team leader says, boss, the reason you didn't know where I was is because I didn't know where I was. I got lost. Next time, I'm going to bring my GPS. I'm going to confirm my location on a map, and I will keep you informed and updated as to my location at all times. You don't have to hold my hand. And what you can see that we have now is a team where every single person on the team is taking ownership of the problems, and therefore the problems get solved. And this team is going to improve every single time, and this team is going to become exceptional. Now, when I talk to companies, sometimes someone comes up to me afterwards, or they, now that we're doing a lot of stuff virtually, they'll send me a chat in the chat box, a private chat, and they'll say, hey, I really liked what you talked about today. I really liked what you said about extreme ownership, and I really hope that my team was listening, because if my team would just take ownership, we'd be good to go. And then someone else will send me a little text or a little chat in the chat box, and they'll say, hey, Jocko, I really liked what you said. I really liked when you talked about the laws of combat leadership. And I really liked what you said about extreme ownership. And I really hope that my boss was listening, because if my boss would just take ownership, we'd be good to go. Well, I'm going to tell you, I'm not talking about your team, and I'm not talking about your boss. It starts with you. It starts with you. It starts with you taking ownership of what's going on in your world. And I can promise you this. If you start to take ownership of what's going on in your world, other people will start to take ownership as well. And this attitude, this mindset will start to spread, and it will become the culture where everyone on your team is taking ownership. And you know what? I know when I say that. I know there's someone there, and they're sitting and they're thinking to themselves, yeah, Jocko's sitting here saying everyone's going to take ownership. He doesn't know about Fred over here, because Fred never wants to take ownership of anything. And you know what? That's actually correct. That's actually correct. And in any organization, in a SEAL platoon, in a sports team, in a business, in a company, in any organization, you are absolutely going to get a small percentage of people that don't want to do this, a small percentage of people that don't want to step up. They're going to be in every organization. But I can tell you this, and I can promise you this, because I've seen it over and over and over again. When you have people inside your organization that do start to step up, that do start to take ownership, that do start to take responsibility, and that do start to lead, those people on your team will absolutely steamroll the people that don't. And this will become the culture in your organization and in your team, and your team will become unstoppable. But it all starts with you.
Jocko, that was great. Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. So much great information. And now it's time for our questions. So we've got quite a bit to get to. We're going to try to get to all your questions here, guys. So I'm going to start, though, Jocko, with the main theme of our conversation, which is leadership. And now we're all living in this virtual world where everyone's working from home. So I guess my first question is, How does one go about being the best leader they can be in a virtual environment?
So luckily, when COVID started and people started going into these aggregated environments where everyone's split up all over the place, well, we have that principle, which I already talked about, which is decentralized command, which means that people are going to be separated. You're not going to be next to them. And what that means, we have to focus on decentralized command because, Kelly, if we've got a client to handle, I'm not going to be sitting with you during the meeting to nudge you on the shoulder and maybe make a suggestion. You have to already know what our intent is, what it is that we're trying to accomplish, what our overall strategy is. You have to know that because I'm not there with you. So what we have to do is just really focus on these principles, especially decentralized command, making sure everyone understands what the mission is, what the goal is, what the end state is, make sure everyone knows why they're doing what they're doing. That's part one. Part two is, look, we're human beings, and human beings are social animals that need interaction. So we can't just, if Kelly and I, if you and I are working together and the only time I contact you is to give you an assignment or to get feedback from a client that we just had, and that's the only contact that we have, well, our relationship is going to start to deteriorate. So I need to invest in our relationship and contact you and reach out to you and see how things are going and have some conversations maybe that we would have at work if we were co-located. Maybe we'd have them at the water cooler. Maybe we'd have them before or after a meeting, but we have to make sure that we continue to maintain and build relationships. Even though we're in a virtual environment, we just have to work a little bit harder there.
All right, Jocko, let's get to some of our questions here. You spoke a lot about leadership and the different ways to do so. John has a question about how do you approach a manager who is a poor planner and it's affecting the overall team? And I've seen a few questions regarding that. Some people, Michael also would like to know about like leadership vacuum problem that he has at his fire department. How does one go about approaching people who may not be leading in the best manner?
Well, Kelly, I didn't pre-warn you. You're going to be my bad example for this whole thing. So if I'm working with Kelly and Kelly is doing a bad job as a planner, whose fault is that? If Kelly is my subordinate and Kelly's doing a bad job with her planning, whose responsibility is that? Whose fault is that?
I think it's probably both are.
No, it's my fault. I'm in charge. I'm the one that's supposed to be training you. I'm the one that's supposed to be mentoring you. I'm the one that's supposed to be sitting you down and saying, hey, here's some good things to think about when you develop a plan. So what I'm going to do is, and there's some questions on here about micromanagement as well. Look, Kelly, if you're not up to speed and you don't have the knowledge to plan correctly, then I have to get with you and sit down with you and maybe even micromanage you a little bit. Hey, Kelly, here's a project I want you to work on. Do me a favor. Tomorrow morning, I want to take a look at your plan. Okay, I look at your plan, make these adjustments. Let's debrief it tomorrow afternoon. So I'm going to have to spend more time with you to get you educated. Now, as time goes on, I don't want to become a micromanager. And if I get to a point where, I've trained you, Kelly, over and over and over again, and you just either don't have the aptitude or you don't care enough to want to put the effort in, well, then I'm going to have to start counseling you and actually escalating that counseling to say, hey, here's what's expected. Here's what you need to do. Here's the expectations, and here's the consequences if you don't meet those expectations. So over time, I have to either train you and get you up to speed, or I have to move you into a position that you can handle. Notice that both of those are things that I'm responsible for. So if I have someone that's not a good planner, I'm going to train them how to plan. I'm going to work with them. I'm going to mentor them. If I can't get them up to speed because they are just not capable or they have the wrong attitude, that's okay. I'll move them to a position that they can handle.
Jocko, you also spoke a lot about communication, planning, and aggression, and how you can do too much and you can do too little. It's all about that balance. Now, how do you go about finding that balance? Is it really just a trial and error for everyone out there who's trying to lead the proper way in their businesses?
Yes, it is unfortunately trial and error. That's the number one unfortunate thing. The number two unfortunate thing is you're never going to find a steady state and say, okay, now I know exactly how much I need to manage Kelly. I can never say, okay, yep, now I've trained Kelly and now I can just leave her alone. Because What if I leave you alone and all of a sudden a project comes in that you haven't done before, and now you start getting off track and I have to get back with you and pull you back on track again. So even though you search for that balance in all these different categories, you're never going to find that balance and be able to just sit there. So you have to, and what you have to do is you have to pay attention. You have to pay attention to the feedback that you're getting, from people. And one example I use for this is, let's say I'm a leader and I've got 8 people on my team, and I have a meeting that I call, and I show up to the meeting 15 minutes late. So when I get to the meeting 15 minutes late, I walk in and no one's saying anything. Everyone's just sitting there with their notebooks. They're waiting for me to come in and tell them what to do. Well, what does that signify to me? What that tells me is that I have micromanaged my team to the point where they don't do anything unless I tell them to do it. So that's a bad sign. I need to give them a little bit more freedom. The other end of the spectrum is, again, I'm in charge of a team. I've got 8 people on my team, and I show up to my meeting 15 minutes late. And when I get in there, there's 3 people that already left. There's 2 people looking at their phones and playing social media on their phones. And there's a couple people working on a project that has nothing to do with our strategic goals. What does that tell me? That tells me I've gone too far to the other side and no one even knows what's happening. So I need to be a better manager. I need to get more engaged with them. The ideal situation is I walk in 15 minutes late, and Kelly, who's the next in the chain of command, looks up and says, "Hey, Jocko, we're almost done with the meeting. I'll debrief you when we're done, and I'll tell you what we're going to be working on today." And I say, "Okay, great, thanks." So I wasn't there. You stepped up and took charge, as it should be. So you have to, in order to stay balanced, you have to spend more time paying attention to the feedback loop that tells you when you're getting in and out of balance.
Now, how big for that feedback loop that you're speaking about? How much of that helps you when you have already gone and put the effort forth for developing relationships with the people that you're working with? Because I imagine that if you have these relationships, people are going to feel more comfortable talking to you. So is that something that, hey, you got to get those relationships so you're able to communicate with these people and they give you like the proper feedback?
Yeah, it's 100% accurate. That's why I'm building relationships. But what is a team? A team isn't you just take a bunch of people and say you're a team now. No, a team is you take a bunch of people, you say you're a team, and then they start to develop relationships. And by relationships, I think I really mean trust. So we start to trust each other and count on each other. That's what becomes a team. And so until we have those relationships, we don't really communicate all that well. There was one question in here about a fire department, and I'm going to pull it up here because it kind of leads into this. Anyways, the question was, here it is. My fire department seems to have a leadership vacuum problem. This especially confuses the rookies and probies out in the field. How should my fire department go about addressing the issue, taking ownership and understanding that communication is paramount when they don't even understand that there's a leadership vacuum? So whenever someone talks to me about, my boss doesn't know what's happening, my boss doesn't have good relationships with us, I always say, oh, okay, whose fault is that? Whose fault is it? If my boss doesn't know what's happening in the field, whose fault is that? What do you think, Kelly?
It would be my fault. I didn't let him know.
It's my fault because I haven't developed a relationship with my boss where I can communicate to he or she about what's happening. I haven't taken the time to capture that information and push it up the chain of command. That's what this is. So if I have a problem with my boss, I immediately just look and say, how do I fix the problem? Not sit here and say, well, my boss should come out in the field more often. Why isn't my boss coming in the field? When's the last time I invited him to come out in the field? What do I not know about my boss? What is my boss doing? What is my boss focused on that maybe I don't see? So we have to take ownership of these issues. And I know it's a really hard pill to swallow. It's a really hard pill to swallow. What's the alternative? The alternative is to sit here and complain about the boss. And what changes? Nothing. So go out, as you said, and build these relationships.
Right. And I saw another question along the lines of that. This one's from Keith, and he said, how do you deal with someone who's an integral part of the team, but not a great team player? Do you cut the cord? Do you move on? And I think that kind of also leads into something that you were speaking about, how people can tend to get defensive. And how do you, I guess, work with those people in the best manner, especially in Keith's question, for instance, and they're a big part of the team. You want to be able to work with them.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of nuances to this issue, right? Because Kelly, if you're part of the team and you've got this skill set that you're incredible at, but you really don't, you like to stay in your box, you like to stay in doing what you're doing, and you really don't like to get outside that box, and maybe you don't always help people out as much as you should. Okay. First of all, how much of a negative impact is it really having on the team? Because look, you're going to get people throughout your career that what they want to do is they want to do their job from 9 to 5. They're going to do a good job at it. They don't really want to be a leader. They don't care too much about getting promoted. Okay, so what are you going to do? Are you going to get rid of them because they don't want to get promoted? Or are you going to say, okay, I've got a role player. It's, in sports, they call it a role player, someone that wants to do that specific job. As far as I'm concerned as a leader, okay, great. I know what I've got. I know what I can utilize them for. Now, I owe it to you, Kelly, to say, hey, Kelly, here's where you're at and you do a great job, but there's some other things that you could be doing that would that could possibly elevate you into a superior position here, if that's something you're interested in. And you might say, oh yeah, what do I need to do? I really do want to get promoted. And so now we can start to develop you. But if you say, you know what, I like my job. I like doing what I do. I'm comfortable with what I do. And I'm really just not, I just want to stay doing what I'm doing. I know that. Okay, great. That's okay. Now, this doesn't mean I cast you away forever, but every 6 months or so, I might check in with you and say, hey, Kelly, you're still doing really well there. Do you got any aspirations? Maybe you want to do something else, elevate a little bit. And you say, no. So it's okay. To me, that's a role player. I'm going to use them to the best of my ability so they can best help the team. And I'm just going to put them in a spot where they're not going to cause negative problems. Now, Kelly, if you're in your thing and you start to have an attitude like, that's not my part, that's not my job, and that person, that I don't need to do that, they should be doing that, and that's not my responsibility. So now if you're starting to negatively impact the whole team, and I'm going to go into a little bit, I kind of mentioned this, there's something that I call the escalation of counseling. The escalation of counseling, because we already talked about the fact that we want to build relationships, right? So Kelly, if you show up late to a meeting, I don't just jump down your throat and say, Kelly, the whole team was waiting on you. This is pathetic. You need to square yourself away. No, because that doesn't build our relationship. And in fact, it's just a bad way to act to another person. But if you were late to a meeting and I after the meeting, I said, hey, Kelly, I noticed you were late. Is everything okay? Is everything okay? And you might say, well, I'm sorry, I had a flat tire. And I say, okay, no problem. Sounds good. And maybe I notice that when I say that to you, you also realize that I noticed that you're late. So there's, even though I'm being nice about it and I'm caring about you and I'm saying, hey, is everything okay? You're also realizing that I care about people being on time. So that's good. And maybe you say, okay, obviously I can't be late with Jocko. So you get yourself another alarm clock and you set that up. And well, maybe you're never late again because you kind of got the message. Or maybe you're late next week. Now, if you're late next week, I got to escalate that counseling a little bit. This doesn't mean I jump down your throat and start yelling and screaming, but I might say, hey, Kelly, this is the second week in a row that you're late and we're not late here. We are professionals. Is everything okay? And you say, yeah, I had the flat tire last week. Well, I had a flat tire again. There was construction on my street and they dropped nails and I didn't see them and I swept them up. Won't happen again. And I say, okay, great. Because that's not something that we do. We are on time. And you go, yep, got it. And now you realize I do really care about, being on time. And so now you're not late again and it's all taken care of. Or maybe you're late next week. And now when you're late next week, I have to say, Kelly, look, I know you got things going on in your life. We all do. We all have things going on in our lives and you can't be late. And in fact, with everything that you're doing, that's great. If you continue to be late, that's going to impact your ability to promote and move up. So can you do me a favor? Can you be on time? Otherwise, I'm actually going to have to write you up, which seems crazy. And you say, oh, Jocko, you don't need to write me up. I'm sorry. It won't happen again. I will not be late. And you get 2 more alarm clocks and you're never late again, which is what we hope for. But maybe it does happen again. And now you're late next week. And now what am I going to do? Now I'm going to do what I told you I was going to do, which is I'm going to write you up. And I'm going to explain to you what your shortfalls were, what the expectation is, and what the consequence will be if you have this behavior again. And you have to sign this thing, and now it's perfectly clear. And you go, oh my God, I can't believe I'm blowing this. I can't make this mistake again. And you get the big giant alarm clock that's super loud, and you're never late again. And we're thankful. Or you're late again, in which case I'm going to proceed with whatever I told you I was going to do, whether that's move you into a different position, give you a demotion, or get rid of you. But you'll notice this was all based on me trying to maintain a good relationship with you because I care about you. And I do. Why did I hire you if I don't care about you? I want you to be successful. So for all these things where we're trying to deal with someone that's maybe not meeting the right level of performance that we need, we have to talk to them. We have to communicate to them. That doesn't mean we drop the hammer on them, but we do this nice escalation of counseling where we start off pretty indirect. And as time goes on and we don't get the effect that we want, we get more and more and more direct with them. So that's what I do. And most of the time, I never make it past, 2 or 3. By the time I'm telling Kelly, I'm going to write you up. You're like, okay, I'm not going to be late again. Most of the time, I don't even get there. Most of the time it's like, oh, I realize that Jocko really cares about this stuff and I'm not going to do it anymore. And that's most of the time. Occasionally you do get someone that doesn't care about their job or doesn't want to do a good job, and they'll eventually get moved out.
Jocko, a lot of great questions that we're getting to. I know that in that explanation, you answered a lot of questions when it comes from, hey, I know a couple people said, when do you know it's the right time to drop people? Go through everything that you were just saying before you get to that point. JM wanted to know, how do you approach a hands-off boss that does not take the time to teach? Is that the same type of approach that you were describing, how you would approach your colleague? Is it the same approach with a higher up as well?
Yeah. So Kelly, if I'm working for you and I'm not getting the guidance that I need from you, I'm going to go and say, hey, Kelly, I know you're swamped for time, but listen, there's 3 things that I've been thinking about that I'm responsible for, and I need a little help, need a little clarification on exactly what it is you want. And maybe you could actually walk me through these things a couple of times to make sure I know how to do them correctly. That's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to sit here and just say, Kelly's not helping me. Why do we fail the mission? Because Kelly didn't show me how to do it. No, I'm going to take ownership. Hey, Kelly, here's what's going on. Here's what I need. Can you give me a hand? Now, what are the chances? What are the chances that Kelly says, you know what, Jocko, I don't have time for you, and I don't have time to teach you how to handle this client right now. I don't care about this client, and I don't care if you do a good job or not. What are the chances of that? I don't want to make money. I don't want us to be a profitable company, and I don't want to have a good reputation. Now, look, I'm not talking about coming to you and say, hey, Kelly, if it's okay, if I could just set up a 9-hour training session with you tomorrow so you can go over this stuff. Look, there's very good chance that your boss has other things to think about and other things to do. But to be able to say, hey, Kelly, can I get 10 minutes a day from you on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday to do a little role playing with me so that I can understand how you handle these clients that come at us with these objections? 10 minutes. I'll bring you a cup of coffee. I mean, why would Kelly not want to invest that time into me? It's going to make us do it's going to make me do a better job. It's going to make us do a better job. It's going to make us a better company. So we have to proactively pull that help that we need. And look, and if Kelly says, I don't have time, guess what I do? I go, okay, you know what, Kelly, I got it. You don't have time. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do a role play with my wife, and I'm going to send you a 4-minute video to make sure that the way I'm handling these things is correct. Is that okay? There you go. Figure out how to make it work.
This is a question from Casey. She says, hi, Jocko. Trust appears to be an underlying foundation of dynamic leadership principles that you discuss. Trust is hard to teach, but easy to earn and also to lose. Your advice on how to build an environment of trust amongst the team.
There's a couple things that are a little bit counterintuitive, and trust is one of them, and how you develop trust. So I'll talk about one of them is listening to people, getting people to listen to you. So if I want people to listen to me, what I should do is actually listen to them. And I know that's counterintuitive, but if I want Kelly to listen to me. This is up or down the chain of command, whether I'm working for Kelly or Kelly's working for me. If I want Kelly to listen to me, I should listen to her. I should listen to her input. Influence. I want people to influence me, or I want to have influence over Kelly. I want to have influence over Kelly. Great. You know what I do? I allow Kelly to influence me, whether she's above me or below me in the chain of command. When Kelly comes to me and says, hey, Jocko, I think we should do the project like this, I should do my absolute best to say, you know what, Kelly, I like your idea. Let's do it that way. In fact, I'll tell you right now, when one of my subordinates or my superiors or one of my peers comes to me and says, I think we should do it like this, my goal is to actually go with their plan. If it'll get the job done, we're going to go with their plan. So that's influence, that's listening, and trust is the same way. If I want to build trust with Kelly, if Kelly's working for me, I will actually say, hey, Kelly, here's the project. Go ahead and come up with a plan, however you think. Get back to me. So I'm giving her trust to come up with a plan. Now, if her plan isn't exactly what I had in mind, does that mean I say, oh, you blew it, Kelly? You blew it. No, I don't say that. I say, hey, Kelly, do you think we can adjust this and maybe that? And she says, oh, okay. I didn't notice those things. So I'm going to give her trust. Same thing with if Kelly's my boss and Kelly's asked me to do something, maybe I don't think it's the best way to do it, but you know what? It's going to take me an extra 20 minutes of work. No big deal. You know what, Kelly? Got it. I go out, I execute that thing. Hey, here's the deliverables, Kelly. Great. And what is Kelly? Kelly's trust goes up in me a little bit. Goes up just a little bit. And I'm going to do that over and over again. And by the way, as I gain her trust, she's starting to trust me more because I'm executing the plan. So in order to build trust, we have to give trust. And look, you have to be, I'm not saying I'm going to say, okay, Kelly, welcome to the team. I don't know you very well. Here's a $4 million client. Why don't you go figure out a plan and let me know how it goes, right? I'm not going to just leave you out there to figure it out on your own, but I might say, hey, come up with a plan, get back to me. We'll talk through it. So in order to build trust, you have to give trust. And then you have to treat people with respect and not leave them out hanging to dry. You know, all my guys always knew that if they did the right thing for the right reasons, even if it went wrong, I would have their back 100%. I would have their back 100%. If they did the wrong thing for the right reasons, I would still have their back. If they did the wrong thing for the wrong reasons, they're going to have a problem. And they all knew that. And guess what? They didn't do the wrong thing for the wrong reasons.
Gotta love it. That kind of leads us into Chris's question, which he said, how do you separate leading from the front versus delegating a task? So I guess being the one to lead the whole thing, then delegating it to someone else.
So here's a bunch of dynamics around this. I'm going to start off with this shocking statement that I make a lot with people. If you want to be in charge of everything, it should be your goal to be in charge of nothing. If you want to be in charge of everything, it should be your goal to be in charge of nothing. So what do I mean by that? It means I'm going to delegate. It means when we get a project and this is again, I already talked about this dichotomy of extreme ownership versus decentralized command. If I'm in charge of our division and we get a client or we get a project and I say, okay, Kelly, I want you to run this project, but then I get down in the weeds with her and I micromanage the whole thing. Well, where am I looking? I'm looking down and in. I'm looking down and into my own team. What does that mean I'm not doing? It means I'm not looking up and out. It means I'm not seeing the future clients. It means I'm not planning for what's going to happen in the future. It means I'm not paying attention to the market. I'm looking down and in instead of up and out. So we don't want to look down and in a leadership position. We want to say, hey, Kelly, here's this project. Why don't you take charge of this? Let me know how you want to execute it. Boom. And I look down for a little bit. Now I look back up and out. Tomorrow I say, hey, Kelly, did you come up with a plan? And Kelly says, yeah, we're going to do A, B, C, and D. And I say, that looks pretty good, except for D. I don't think we need to do that. Maybe skip to E. And Kelly says, yeah, that actually makes sense. Okay, great. So I spend my time looking up and out. Does that mean you always look up and out? No. Then you end up like the firefighter that says his team, his leadership doesn't know what's going on down with the front lines. So we have to delegate, absolutely, but you still have to check in. Now, what you have to watch out for is you have to watch out for this type of situation. Hey, Kelly, this terrible client has a major issue and they're really angry about it. Why don't you take that call? I'll see you later. right? So what we don't want to do is delegate the hard tasks, delegate things that we know are going to be miserable. I wrote a book called Leadership Strategy and Tactics, and I would always proactively look. I was looking up and out as much as I could. But if there was a miserable job to be done or a mission that was going to be very, very taxing, I would step in and do those jobs, do those hard things, do those, even some tedious jobs. We'd have to pick up, we'd have to pick up our brass shell casings on the ranges after we shot. And we would shoot in these massive ranges out in the middle of the desert. And we'd get done shooting for 3 or 4 weeks, and there'd be hundreds of thousands of these little casings to pick up, and it would take us 3 or 4 days to do. And it'd be 120 degrees and you'd be on your hands and knees. I know no one thinks that the big Navy SEALs are out there on their hands and knees cleaning up ranges, but that's what we do. We make the mess, we clean up the mess. And I would always make it a point, even when I was the senior guy, to go out there and pick up the brass with the team. So they knew I wasn't escaping off to some meeting because there was hard work to do. So what you want to do is delegate as much as you can. You want to be in charge of nothing. In order to be in charge of everything, you want to try and be in charge of nothing and do the hard jobs.
This is from an anonymous attendee. He would like to know, or he or she would like to know, where should a manager start when the team is broken?
Again, there's a lot of nuances to what a broken team can be made up of. There can be violations of trust. There can be, failed. Sometimes it's just multiple failed missions and you end up with a defeated attitude. So in a case like that, in most of these cases, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start to find small victories for the team. So look, we failed missions, or we got a lack of trust, or we had a big blow up between some of our team members. I mean, like I said, there's a lot of different ways to have a broken team. How do we rebuild that team? The way I'm going to rebuild that team is I'm going to start off by trying to find small victories. I'm going to find some things that we're going to be able to do. I'm going to find some mission taskings. I'm going to find some projects that we can handle, and we're going to knock those things out of the park. And I'm going to set that goal. Hey, we're going to make this happen, and we're going to do that thing, and we're going to do it to the best of our ability, and we're going to win, because I'm going to pick things that I know we can win at. I'm not going to pick total softballs, but I'm going to pick things that I know we can do. And then I am going to start to rebuild that confidence over time. You have to do that. I would have to do that with young SEALs sometimes, young SEAL officers, that they would have a bad mission, and I could see that they were very shaken up by it. And maybe their platoon or their squad was very shaken up by a rough mission. And I would say, okay, yep, hey, look, here's the lessons we learned from it. And now here's your next mission. The next mission would be an easier mission, a less challenging mission that I know that they could do to start to rebuild their confidence. So start small and rebuild one step at a time.
And that goes hand in hand a little bit there with what Orlando wants to know. And he wants to know he's got 2 questions, but we'll leave you with this. Our last question: is a leader responsible for morale? Then he wants to know who your favorite leader is and why.
Is a leader responsible for morale? The answer is yes. The leader is responsible for everything. And I know that sounds crazy. And I recently had a conversation with my team. I had a new member of the Echelon Front team, and he was working with a client, and the CEO of a big company said, hey, look, I get the extreme ownership thing, but I got a person on the front lines. I got 5,000 employees. That person on the front lines makes a mistake. That's not on me. And he had a hard time answering that question and kind of talked his way through it. And he came back to me and said, hey, what do I say here? It seems like a valid point, right? If there's 5,000 people in the organization and this CEO at the top, she can't take responsibility for what some frontline cash register is doing. And I said, well, yes, she can. And yes, she must. And here's the answer. Look, if I have 5,000 people inside my organization and I've got a frontline cash register that is rude to a client, rude to a customer, and it gets out and we hear about it. I hear about it. Now I could just say, oh, yeah, I got 5,000 people. That's not on me. And then what changes? What do I do better? What do I do different? Is that problem going to occur again? Yes, it absolutely is. But what if I say, hey, you know what? We've got someone that was rude to a client. Obviously, I have done a bad job of selecting the people that we're hiring, of training the people that we're hiring, of making sure that everyone inside my organization understands that the only reason we exist is because of our customers. So we better take care of our customers. I failed to get that word out to the front lines. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to implement these new standards for who we hire. I'm going to implement some more training about our customer interaction. And I'm going to make sure that everybody at our company knows 100% what our values are. And so then I'm going to make those changes. Now, does that mean this is never going to happen again? No, it's going to happen again. And next time I'll learn something else and I'll continue to improve the situation. It's going to happen again, but it will happen less. And the only way it happens is when people start to take ownership. By the way, when I say, hey, that's not my responsibility, what about the person below me in the chain of command? They're going to say, well, it's really not my responsibility either. And then you get right on down to the manager of the cash register that says, hey, I got 10 cash registers here. I can't control them all day long. So now no one's taking responsibility. And once again, the problems don't get solved. So take ownership up and down the chain of command. Take ownership, and you're responsible for the cash register. And yes, you are responsible for morale. And as far as leaders go, my favorite leader, I guess, is a guy named Colonel David Hackworth, who was a soldier in the Army, and he was very highly decorated from the Korean War and the Vietnam War. And he wrote a book called About Face, which is about an 800-page book. And it's about his experiences. And it's not written as a leadership book, but it is absolutely a leadership book. And I actually wrote a foreword for a re-release of that book that came out last year. And it's because I learned so many lessons from that book about how to lead, about humility, about taking ownership. It all started with that book for me. So I would say that is my favorite leader.
Awesome. Jocko, thank you so much for your time, for your inspiring words. And thank you to everyone out there who joined us, submitted all these wonderful questions. Sorry we couldn't get to everything. But again, Jocko, thank you so much for your time. As for everyone else out there, I'd like to congratulate our first raffle prize winner from this morning. We have another prize being announced shortly. So make sure you guys continue to navigate the site, check out the leaderboard, see how you're doing. Next up, we have our session with our platinum partner, HP, on the need for comprehensive cybersecurity strategy. That will be with Siobhan Albright, the chief technologist from HP. Head back to the auditorium. You can enjoy that session right now. Make sure that you guys visit our partners in the expo, including representatives from the Milner team, who are here to answer all your questions, how we can support your business. Jocko, thanks again.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And thank you to the veterans that are on the line. I know you got a bunch of veterans on the line. And look, I know I talk a lot about war, and I talk about combat in my books and on my podcast. And I want you to know I don't wish combat or war on anyone, just like I don't wish any challenges on people. I don't wish COVID-19 on our country or on the world, or the political strife that we're facing, or market downturns, or any of that. I don't wish any of those challenges on anybody, but at the same time, it is these challenges that we face that demand us to be resilient. It is these challenges that we face that demand us to learn to adapt and overcome and figure things out. And it's these challenges that we face that make us and our teams stronger. And it is these challenges that we face that ultimately require us to step up and to lead. So embrace the challenges you are facing. Cover, move for each other, keep things simple, focus on the right priorities, and through decentralized command, each and every one of you take extreme ownership, step up, and lead. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Jocko.